Okay, I think we should be good to go. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening from me, wherever you're joining us from, and a very warm welcome on behalf of the New Directions team and of the British Council. My name is Elena. I'm a research assistant with the British Council, and I'm Programme Chair for the upcoming New Directions in Language Assessment East Asia Conference. That event is taking place in late October in Hanoi, Vietnam. And in the lead up, the British Council has been organising a variety of webinars covering a very wide range of topics that relate to this year's conference theme. And today's topic is putting the CEFR at the centre of classroom assessment in a global teaching programme. Throughout the webinar, feel free to engage and ask questions in the chat function, and there'll be opportunity for Q&A. As you will have already noticed, your camera and mic functions are disabled, so we'll be engaging through the chat. So without much further ado, I'd like to introduce Aidan Holland from the British Council. We're very excited to be part of the webinar today. Welcome, Aidan.
Thanks, Elena. Good morning, everyone, and welcome from a very sunny UK. My name is Aidan Holland, and as Elena said, I work for the British Council. At the moment, I'm working for the Global Assessments team, but I've been working for the British Council since 2009. When I've worked as a teacher, coordinator, centre manager, and then in regional roles, looking at the teaching products that we use in our teaching centre network. This talk is very much a summary of a project that I've been working on over the last 18 months to look at how we can enhance classroom assessment by making it more explicit links to the CEFR. The project that we've been working on has included colleagues from many different departments within the organisation, so both from teaching, coordinating, centre management, project management, content development, and most importantly, the action research group. And together we've gone through a long process of finding out more about the problem that we were trying to resolve, which I'll present to you during this workshop, and explain the tool that we developed that we thought would best help teachers to make progress more evident in classes, in English teaching classes. So without further ado, I'll share my screen. So that's a brief introduction. Here's the menu for today's workshop. I'll be giving you a bit more context about the teaching context that we're working within in the British Council, that we were working within to develop this tool to make classroom progress more evident. The challenge, we'll be spending some time thinking about what the challenge is that we were trying to overcome, and how we brought together key stakeholders from different parts of the organisation to work together to develop a solution for that challenge. In the latter part of the workshop, I'll be presenting the assessment tool, the classroom assessment tool that we developed, which in essence is a form of checklist that is linked explicitly to the course and that the teachers are trained in. And then I'll be placing that within the wider vision for how we would like, or how at least I would like classroom assessment within this context to develop. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time before we talk explicitly about the classroom teaching materials that we're working with, thinking about 3 specific levels within the Common European Framework. This is because the examples that I'm going to be showing you and talking about are all related to B1. So I'd like to recap just briefly what are the main defining features of the levels above and below, as well as B1. So starting from A2, I'd just like you to skim that general overview of the skills and abilities that an A2 learner, that are characteristic of an A2 learner. So A2 very much related to the familiar, our ability to communicate basic information about topics that are familiar to the speaker. With B1, we increase in complexity slightly, so the learner would be able to deal with a greater variety of situations, and can start to move away slightly from the familiar if they have enough kind of planning time. B2. Here we're moving very much towards an advanced user of the language, so they're beginning to develop fluency and spontaneity, which are two of the key characteristics of B2. While they may still make mistakes, they're able to talk with fluency and a relative degree of accuracy. Okay, so the group that worked together on this project consisted of people from 3 main areas, and I've tried to represent that with the different colours. So in the bottom left in pink, we had a group of teachers, teacher coordinators and managers.
Neil, Aidan, very sorry to interrupt. Can you just maybe stop sharing your slide and start sharing it again? I think people have issues seeing it, so maybe we can fix the issue by doing that. Just maybe stop sharing your slides and then go back on again. Thank you. Very sorry for the interruption.
No, it's okay.
Don't have a never able to have a webinar without some technical issues.
Sure. Yes. I hope that's worked.
I can see it perfectly. Can you pop a quick message into the chat? But please, Aidan, continue. Thank you so much.
Just please feel free to pause me if there's any more issues.
Will do.
So as I was saying, these were the main people from the organisation that were working on that developed the assessment solution for the class. In the bottom left, we had the people in pink who were teachers, teacher coordinators, and managers. And these were people from a variety of centres from around our teaching centre network. I know many of you are in Vietnam. The British Council operates teaching centres where we offer general English courses to learners in over 40 countries around the world. So these people were from, in pink, were from both East Asia, the Middle East and Europe and Americas. In the bottom right in green, we had 4 of our experts from the assessment research group, very much concerned with kind of assessment research. They were bringing the theoretical expertise that we needed into the project. And then up at the top in blue, we had people from the content development team. The British Council develops its own materials for the English language courses that it offers around the world. And Martina and Howard work in kind of an editorial and project management capacity there. We've got kind of the dual colours. I put myself in pink as I have worked as a teacher, coordinator and manager, but I've also spent a lot of time working as product owner for Secondary Plus, during which time I have a lot of input into the kind of content development team. And the people in blue in the pink box have a more managerial focus and teacher training focus within those. So this was very much a group which represented different types of knowledge and a great variety of expertise working in the context that we're working in. So let me tell you a little bit more about the teaching context itself. The course is called Secondary Plus. Secondary Plus spans levels A1 to C1. Within each level, and the levels are broken down into the 0.1 and 0.2 levels in several cases. In each level, say B1.1, there are 10 modules. The modules are packaged as a series of magazines. So B1.1 has 10 magazines. Each of the magazines is thematically based. This one, for example, is based around the senses, and it leads up to an end of class project. The materials are all, when they were written, it was the ambition of the content development team to link them to the CEFR, and the materials writers were given guidance on how to do this. The modules, as I said, are thematic. They're based around topics that are of interest to teenage learners. Secondary Plus is aimed at teenage learners from 13 to 17 years old. As I say, over the course of 8 to 10 hours for each magazine, the learners are led up to a project which they complete around the theme of the module. As we can see there, they end in a project. I've put here on the right the project guide. At the end of the magazine, students are led through a series of steps to decide on, plan, practice, and execute the projects. The projects are almost exclusively based on the productive skills. So it's some form of presentation, report, essay, speaking or writing are common skills. So this is the context that we're working with. The challenge. Secondary Plus was always envisaged to take a formative approach to assessment. So teachers were asked to engage learners with the objectives of lessons and get them to reflect regularly. However, this product has been rolled out for a number of years now, and we regularly get comments from both students and parents that they find it challenging to see progress during courses, a feeling that is amplified as they move up the CEFR levels. When we investigated this a bit further in the working group that we put together, we found a number of problems. There were no explicit guidance on how to conduct assessment in the Secondary Plus product, neither for teachers, nor for coordinators, nor managers. They were given the impression that they should be regularly asking the students to reflect on what they've done during lessons, but really were given no more guidance than that. So what happened was centres were forming their own assessment systems, and alongside this, and which was normal, they had to formulate their own reporting systems. In the lack of explicit assessment expertise, these varied greatly, and we'll have a look at one or two of the local reports that were designed. What was happening was teachers were often required to design their own assessments in class. So as you can imagine, working in over 40 countries with the same product, we're going to have many different variations of assessment, all thematically linked in the sense that they were supposed to be getting students to reflect, but in reality we're taking a very varied approach, and one that was regularly being commented on by the learners as something that wasn't creating a sense of progress. So in the lack of, to summarize, in the lack of explicit guidance from the materials themselves on how to conduct assessment in class, sense of progress was not being created sufficiently enough. Here we can see the only element of assessment that's included currently in the print materials So after learners have gone through 8 to 10 hours in a module in a magazine, there's a reflect section that teachers can use to ask them what they've learned during the course, during that previous magazine, and getting them to think about language and maybe what they need to do to practice more. Here we can see an example of a typical report, in this one from France. Centres, quite logically, were reporting on the skills, often some element of attitude to language. And in these areas, teachers were often asked to assign a mark on a qualitative scale, such as excellent, good, satisfactory, etc. There's often a space on the report for teachers to write a comment, as you can see there below. Now, the issue here is the ideas of speaking or writing are very vague, or reading and listening. Equally vague are the qualitative categories that the teachers are being asked to assign. So for this student and this teacher, speaking may have a very different connotation for them as to the next teacher or the next student. Equally, the good assigned by Sophie, the teacher, may be different to what Carl understands as good. So again, this is a very vague way of communicating what's happened during a course, and progress reports are typically sent out 3 times a year. It's very challenging to understand what the categories are in these type of reports, and we felt that this was one of the main issues blocking a clear sense of progress. So what did we do? Bringing together the key stakeholders. Talking about a bit of theory here, the comprehensive learning system by our colleague Professor O'Sullivan reinforces the idea that for an education system to be effective, the 3 key elements of curriculum, assessment and delivery need to be working in harmony around a clear set of standards. As we saw on a previous slide, the people in the different coloured boxes are linked to this slide in the sense that the people in blue in the content development team were very much responsible for developing the curriculum. The people in pink, if you remember, were the teachers and coordinators. They're responsible for the delivery. And the people in the assessment research group in the blue box from previously, they were concerned with assessment. In the case of Secondary Plus, none of these groups up until then had been communicating explicitly, had been communicating with each other. And the efforts for the content development team to link the materials to the CEFR, while well-intentioned, could have gone a lot further and been a lot more explicit in how the materials were linked to the CEFR. The elements basically in our Secondary Plus learning system needed to interact with each other a lot more, and that's what this project provided the forum to do. And what's more, they needed to interact with each other a lot more around common standards, so the CEFR. The common standards, as you'll see as we go into the next few slides, are really critical in driving this sense of progress in the class, as they provide a framework for both teachers and students to understand what learning is going on and where they can go from one class to another and even one academic year to another. So one of the main issues in terms of this theory was that the Secondary Plus learning system and its elements were working in isolation, and this was creating a misalignment, which was not creating a sense of progress, which was not having the impact of a sense of progress. Our colleagues in the assessment research group used this publication to inform the approach that we took when we developed a solution, aligning language education with the CEFR. The handbook on alignment really emphasises the need for evidence of alignment across materials, courses and assessment. It offers practical advice regarding how to achieve this alignment. Now, while much alignment's been done in terms of high stakes tests to the CEFR, relatively little had been done with with aligning course materials to the CEFR. And this publication really provided a rich source of ideas and a good framework for how we could do this, all with the aim in mind of creating this sense of progress. Now, moving into the solution, getting beyond the theory here. Now, on this slide, I'm really going to summarize what was quite a lengthy and detailed process. I'm going to try and do it in as concise a way as possible. If you do have any questions while I'm speaking, please pop them in the chat, and maybe I could pause and see if there's any doubts or any questions after I've summarized it. So aligning the materials to the CEFR. There were basically three main stages. First of all, the people doing the aligning had to become familiar on quite a detailed level with the CEFR. The people doing the familiarization were the teachers and the coordinators, all of whom up until entering into the project had quite a superficial understanding of what the different CEFR levels meant. So we started out the alignment by making sure that they were clear what the main skills and abilities were for the, we started with B1.1, we focused on B1.1, we made sure that the people were familiar with what B1.1 was in terms of the CEFR descriptors. Once that was done, we moved into the mapping stage. The mapping stage consisted of taking the B1.1 level, assigning different modules to different mappers. The mappers had to systematically go through each activity in turn and map it to between 1 and 4 descriptors in the CEFR and the CEFR companion volume. That once they'd done this, they had to share it with a co-mapper who went and checked the work that they had done to make sure that there was a consensus between at least 2 people and sometimes 3, that the activities in the magazines at B1.1 corresponded to between 1 and 4 descriptors each in the CEFR and the companion volume. This took several months to do, as there was, again, it took time to familiarise with the CEFR, and then the mapping process was quite lengthy. We're talking about a high number of activities in each magazine, each of which had to have between 1 and 4 descriptors. 1 and 4 is arbitrary. This is what happened as they were mapping. In fact, some of the activities didn't have any descriptors, as they were felt to be kind of transition instructions that didn't require being mapped to a descriptor. What happened? So again, within the B1.1 magazines, we found that the majority of activities, here we're looking at the number of descriptors from the CEFR in the B1.1 magazines, the number of individual descriptors. So we can see the majority, just the majority in 21, are from the consensus raters agreed that the majority of the descriptors B1.1 were actually at B1.1. There were a number both below and above the B1.1. So they'd chosen both a 2.2 and below descriptors as well as B1.2 descriptors. We found that this was in harmony with the teaching approach. So in materials, we'd expect that some of the activities would be slightly below the target level, and some of the activities will be slightly above the target level. so as to be able to lead in or scaffold learning effectively as we're leading into B1.1 activities, and also to be able to provide an extra level of challenge for learners who are doing doing well at the level and want a bit more extra and need to be pushed a little bit further. This is also confirmed in the companion volume descriptors, the majority of which had been selected from the B1 descriptors, 13 individual descriptors across the B1.1 level. So just in summary of these three slides, so after an extensive training and mapping process between around about 10 people, all kind of experts in the field, we found that the materials that we were using were, after a rigorous mapping process, which is a good source of validity evidence for the course itself, were at the level that it was purporting to target, which is good. And it also seemed to be in harmony with the teaching approach that we were taking. So where do we go from there? So we've learned about the organization's context. I've explained a little bit about Secondary Plus. We operate in many different contexts. I've talked somewhat about the challenge of lack of progress. After consulting with the assessment research group, we developed this system where we systematically checked that the B1.1 level was actually at the B1.1 level, and it was. This had been informed by the handbook on alignment. We then moved into the phase where we developed a classroom assessment tool. Let me represent what we did visually. The classroom assessment tool that we developed had to be practical, had to be usable for teachers, had to be understandable by the students who were using it. This again took several months just to figure out, and after trialing several versions of it, just to find the happy balance of academic rigor and practicality in the classroom. I'm representing the enhancement that we made visually. The blue line that we're looking at is representing 8 to 10 hours of classroom time. It's representing a Secondary Plus module. The pink line here is what teachers were already doing in class, informal classroom assessment. We knew teachers were observing their students. We knew they were doing self and peer assessments with them, and we knew that they were regularly asking them to reflect. And what's more, we knew the students regularly fed back that they were enjoying these reflections and they found them useful. This was already going on. Much of our training around the British Council network in secondary and in primary, across the life stages, encourages teachers to use a plan, do, review approach when they're teaching lessons. So regularly share your aims, get students to reflect, and then plan back into subsequent lessons necessarily. So if you need to spend some more time on a topic that you've just covered, you do. If you can move on, you move on. You're regularly getting students to engage with their learning. This was already happening. As we saw earlier, students were asked in the print materials, there was a reflection segment in the magazines, which is essentially a self-assessment and reflection. This was not particularly systematically linked to the reports or to the CEFR. What we did was we introduced into this system a CEFR linked assessment. So knowing that the B1.1 materials were at the level after doing the mapping process, we developed a self-assessment checklist that teachers would use to assess the extent to which students were achieving the descriptor in the productive stage of the project. That's quite a lot of information in that sentence, and I'll be giving you an example of what that looks like in a moment. The project assessment tool, again, very much focused on the project. It's a double-sided piece of paper which accompanies each magazine. It specifies the project or step or activity that is being assessed, always in the project. In this case, we're looking at a magazine where students have to design and make a game. Students are then, the CEFR linked assessment is assessing the written production in this, in which they have to write out the rules of their game. Teachers are given some confirmation as to how to set up projects, as this is a writing assessment, and they're asked to write 100 to 200 words. The critical information in this assessment, CEFR linked assessment, is the can-do statement, which is taken from the CEFR. In this particular one, I can write notes conveying simple information of immediate relevance to friends, teachers, and others, comprehensively getting across the points I consider important. This is what the teachers are marking the students' work on. Then we've got the performance indicators, which break down and give teachers some more information about what the can-do assessment is in terms of the written production in these different areas: focus, fluency, range, accuracy, discourse, and appropriateness. Teachers are asked to look at the sample of student production and, against the CEFR descriptors that we just saw, decide whether the student's work is approaching, meeting, or extending. On the reverse of the assessment tool, they've got a space to write the student's name, the level of achievement they thought they required, that they demonstrated, and any extra notes that they want to write. This is linked to a standardized system of reporting. So at the end of reporting periods, and that might be again 3 times a year, students progressively build up a bar graph of evidence that are taken from the productive stages of the projects. So the teachers are working through a magazine, they get to the project, the student produces something, a presentation or a piece of writing. The teacher assesses this on the different levels of achievement, and this gets recorded and transferred into a graph, which we can see here on the screen. And then there's also a section for each of the different bars in the bar charts, which specify what the module is, what the project was, what the can-do statement was, and what the level of achievement was. So as you can see, we're very much trying to create a more visual sense of progress in the course. So teachers are regularly doing their informal classroom assessments. What we've introduced here is a CEFR linked assessment that's linked to the level of the course, which they get regular feedback on and is presented visually at the end of a course so that they can get a greater sense of achievement. Key to this is teacher training and standardization. Very much as examiners get training to be an IELTS examiner, or to be a Cambridge examiner, where they become familiar with the standards, have an opportunity to apply the standards, and then have an opportunity to use the standards. We very much inform the teacher training and standardization approach from this. And again, this was developed over a series of months, and I'm trying to explain to you it now in a few minutes. So I'll try again to be as clear as possible. The first stage in the teacher training and standardization element was to understand the project can-dos, taking specific examples. So we obtained around 15 different samples of different pieces of work from students around our network. We rated them in our group to have a consensus rating between us. And then we wrote up those materials so that we could use them with other colleagues from around the network. And the process that we'd want other colleagues coming to this new to go through would be over a series of samples. The first stage is understand what the project can-do is, read the can-do statement, and have a look at the performance indicators to try and understand what that means in terms of classroom production. We'd then move into the stage where teachers would rate some example samples, and against the different levels of achievement, and have an opportunity to discuss them with a colleague before being given a moderated answer. So the answer being that all of these samples that we're working with in the teacher training and standardization have gone through an extensive moderation session with the core working group, so that teachers coming into this new to have the training get to apply the standard, but then get a resolution at the end of it, so that they understand why each sample that they're working with has been rated at the level of achievement it's been rated at. We're going to now move into the more interactive part of the workshop, and we're going to be working with a couple of projects and a couple of can-do statements. The first one's a written project, and it's the example that I used earlier. Students in this magazine have to work together to make a game or a puzzle and write the rules for this game or puzzle. Step 4 is what we're focusing on with this assessment, CEFR linked assessment. Write out the rules for your game or puzzle. And as we looked at earlier, this is the assessment can do. I'd like you to take a couple of minutes there just to read that. It's a B1.1 descriptor. And generic, can write notes conveying simple information of immediate relevance, comprehensively getting across the points I consider important. It's simple information, comprehensibility important. This is the part of the assessment checklist that teachers use, and it helps them understand what the reality of the production should look like in those 6 areas. So in terms of focus, is it focus on the content? Did they complete it in the appropriate amount of time? Obviously, only teachers in the context would know that. Were the sentences and phrases related to concrete situations? Accuracy in terms of frequently used structures are used accurately. There may be some errors in use of tenses. Got basic linking words for discourse, and basic sentences, kind of the appropriateness is a bit of the effect that it's having on the reader. There has to think about those things. Now, I'd like you to read this sample of students' work. These rules came from one of the students around the network. Read the piece and decide whether you'd give it approaching, meeting, or extending. Okay, this is the moderated comment that we use to wrap up each discussion. So the teacher would have looked at the can-do, looked at the performance descriptors, read the sample, discussed it with a colleague. This is more complex to do it in here. And then they're given this moderated evaluation. So this student focused on the content required and successfully conveyed the information to explain the rules of a game, completing the task within the appropriate amount of time. They demonstrated that they can write sentences and phrases that relate to the context. They can write frequently used structures accurately and spell some common vocabulary. Although they make some errors, They use basic linking words at sentence level, and they use of languages appropriate to the context. So this is meeting. What did teachers think of this approach? The most important piece of feedback that we got, and we've done several feedback and focus group sessions, was that teachers found it easier to give quality, focused and meaningful feedback, both in classes and in the reports. They thought the approach, whilst the immediate understanding or the immediate impression is complexity through change, the approach was clear and practical enough, which meant that teachers didn't have to come up with their own assessments. The system, the basic system that we're providing them is there. So basically, the impact of these type of assessments on the teacher's classroom practice is giving more focus to the project, which is where the teachers are getting to at the end of an 8 to 10 hour cycle. If they have it clear what kind of skills and abilities are going to be practiced and assessed in that project, they're more able to give feedback which is quality focused and meaningful there. It is only one descriptor at the moment, and as we look, there's a wider vision for assessment in which we may introduce more of these assessments. There is only one descriptor at the moment, but the fact that it's explicitly linked to the CEFR in a set of course materials that we've confirmed do fit to the CEFR, we feel that it's a great step forward in providing kind of an anchor to, or kind of an explicit connection to the level that the students are at. This second comment here with regards to the system and not having to invent new classroom assessment systems is really clear as well. Before, teachers felt quite lost as to what's a good assessment, what isn't. How do we get any standardization in this? It's completely organic. Everyone does their own thing. This isn't replacing the organic nature of classroom assessment. Teachers need to have agency in that. They need to be able to be creative with their own informal classroom assessments, but they found it really helped them to have at least an element of a practical system in there. We're going to have a look at if we've got time, at an example of spoken production. But just thinking about the wider vision for assessment, it would be nice to include more CEFR linked assessments into the ecosystem. So teachers are doing informal classroom assessment 95% of the time. If we've got to spend the other 5% of the time doing these CEFR linked assessments, we can give greater visibility to the more formal end of the classroom assessment decline in terms of the CEFR construct that we have in each level. So there'd be a nice complement to the plan, do, review cycle and the informal system of classroom assessment. Enhancing this with teaching excellence initiatives such as communities of practice and action research, in which teachers explore or are given a forum to think about what effective plan, do, review cycles look like with different ages of learners, and what different and share resources for internal informal classroom assessments would be great. Now, what I'd like to do before we end is to look at an example from speaking, if that's okay. So we looked at a standardization rating example from writing. We also had a number of samples from speaking. I need to share this with you via a PDF. These are examples of the materials that we put together for teachers in PDF. So all of our spoken and written samples are in PDFs for our trainers to use with teachers, as we'll be rolling this system out, as we are currently rolling this system out during this calendar year. This spoken sample is taken from again, B1.1 magazine, around myths and legends, in which the students have to prepare and give a tour guide talk about a place linked to a myth. The assessed step in the project section is when they give their talk. Sorry. Working groups take turns to be the tour guide and give your talk to the rest of the group. In the class, the groups would listen to the talks and maybe ask questions. The assessment can do is I can give detailed descriptions on a variety of familiar subjects related to my interests. And I'll give you a minute to read the performance indicators. There's quite a lot of information to take in there. If you were in a standardization session, you would have a physical copy of this resource before you listen to the sample, which I'll play for you now. I'm not sure what the quality of this sample is going to be, so I'll try. Okay, I'm going to play now. Again, that was just to give you a flavour of the type of what the samples look like that we use with teachers when we're doing standardization. This particular example, this is a summary, was extending. So we felt that this student readily gave a description on her topic. She produced utterances in accordance with the purpose of the task, giving a detailed description of the event. She spoke for an appropriate amount of time, despite some pausing, which is characteristic of B1.1. She demonstrates confidence, a range of sentence patterns beyond the routine. She gives detailed descriptions. She's usually clear with a good degree of accuracy. She uses frequent linking words and demonstrates an awareness of audience, using expressions and phrases appropriate to context. So yeah, those two examples that we used are taking an example from the classroom. These are real examples of students using the Secondary Plus materials, and we're assessing them in a really fair and appropriate and practical way for the teachers against a CEFR descriptor that's appropriate that could be used to give meaningful and contextualized feedback to the students. The teachers very much in these CEFR linked assessments asked to remove their teacher's hat and put on their tester's hat. So they're trying to distance themselves from what they know about the student and focus on what the student's doing in the moment, so as to be able to give them some meaningful feedback onto how well what they're doing in the magazine projects fits with the descriptor of the CEFR. For the rest of the time, yes, they're teachers, but these CEFR linked assessments allow for us to introduce an element of objectivity and a reference point into the students' learning, which we hope and that feedback suggests that is having the desired outcome, so as to create a greater sense of project by making the CEFR linked assessment stepping stones in the course more visible to the students and the teachers. So just to reinforce the theory on which we're basing this by our colleague Professor O'Sullivan, the importance of linking the three key elements of learning systems: curriculum and assessment and delivery. If you're interested in doing anything like this in your own context, please let this inform you. Think about curriculum. Is your curriculum informed by standards? How have your teachers been trained in the curriculum in those standards? In terms of assessment, how's your assessment being informed by the standards, and how have the key stakeholders been helped to understand the purpose and role of the assessment? You can see in examples that I've been given that we have quite an extensive training, moderation, standardization package around the assessment that we developed. This is really critical to the effectiveness of this assessment system. And in terms of delivery, have the teachers been trained in the standards sufficiently? Are they given enough opportunity to understand what the curriculum is, and are they able to deliver it effectively? These are some of the key questions that you might want to ask yourself in developing these kind of more classroom assessments that are at the more formal end of the assessment climb. Again, reinforcing the utility of this book, Aligning Language Education with the CEFR. This has all of the information that you may need if you wanted to conduct a similar mapping exercise in your own context. If you're going to do it, the tips from our experience here is you need a multifunctional team. You need your course administrators working with the teachers, the coordinators, and of course somebody with an assessment background. Practicality is key. We did try to include, I think, 5 or 6 descriptors in the initial versions of the assessment tool, but this didn't work. We had to reduce it to 1, and that was much more practical for teachers. You must get constant feedback from your stakeholders, especially the people who are using it, teachers, and give them adequate support to be able to understand and use it in their own contexts. And I think we've got a couple of minutes there at the end for questions. Elena.
Hello, I'm actually waiting for Kat as well to come on. I think Kat was helping with the Q&A. Kat, have there been any questions at all?
Hi, Elena. I think there was a question from Robin about. Do you want me to read it out?
Yes, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah. So, has the recent spread in availability of AI translation and writing tools had an impact on the writing assessments? For example, students using the tools to produce better quality work than they would independently, or teachers using AI tools to rate student work?
I don't know the answer to that. I think a lot of our teachers do these writing assessments, which are quite short in class, so students have to write them physically.
Okay, thank you. Another question from I think it's Jean Anthony. How do we ensure that the writing self-assessment done by the student is not? It's a similar question. Is not generated by the student from any AI applications? Do we have provisions on this matter, or AI generated assessment is not an issue here?
Again, I think our context here is very much short writing assessments. So we're talking between 50 and 80 words in class. Students wouldn't have access to technology to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And no, I mean, the system hasn't been designed to think about students doing pieces of writing at home. So we didn't, and it was before any ChatGPT came out. So no provision has been taken for that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Aidan. I think those were the two questions we'd had in the chat. I think if anyone wants to have a follow-up question, maybe we can unmute the mic, but otherwise that would be all of the questions. Do you want to post? Or raise your hand if you have a question you'd like to speak out about. That's probably a better way of doing it. Okay, looks like we don't have any further questions at the moment. Oh, yes, maybe. Yeah. Let's see. Saw a hand, but it went back down again, so maybe not. Okay, I think that's all the questions.
All right.
Oh no, the hand is back up again. I'm not sure if it's. We want to give. Is it? Let's see. Bajaruddin, would you like to ask a question? Let me allow your mic, and please go ahead.
Very much, Rachel. Thank you very much for the presentation. In terms of the CEFR, is my voice clear anyway?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So I'm an academic manager in a language center, or let's say an English academy or English private school. Yeah, we use the CEFR as our standard of curriculum because our subject is only English, and we try to teach English as a second language while I'm in Indonesia, and Indonesia still use the terms of English as a foreign language. So I would say like it's a start to use the CEFR as the standard in terms of the leveling, in terms of the criteria of how English proficiency works for the people, for the learners. And I have been following a CEFR assessment, things that related to the CEFR for the past only 2 to 3 years, starting from 2020, and it really helps when it comes to have a real description, or let's say a relevant statements on how we can measure the English learners level. But so far, or maybe until this day, most learners still rely their English level on exam, or let's say proficiency exam tests. Yeah, or maybe if I can mention like TOEFL or IELTS and etc. So yeah, so this kind of description is still something unfamiliar when it comes to measure English learners level like that. So my question is that, so is there any like what kind of let's say means or mediums that we can use in terms of the curriculum and also teaching materials if we want to align with this project, the CEFR as the assessment, while most learners here still rely on traditional tests, or even maybe like multiple choice based tests as an English proficiency test. So like what kind of teaching materials should we just rely on, like conventional teaching materials while students like use fill in the blanks, or let's say answering multiple choices, or maybe we can try to step up and also let's say to transform to something into a more test-based language learning, or something project like we can use a can-do statement that just presented today. Yeah, that's my question.
I think the key word is alignment. You could use and you should continue to use the teaching materials that are most appropriate to your context. The issue with many teaching materials is they haven't been systematically aligned to the CEFR, and the materials we were working with fitted within that category. They'd been informed by somebody's concept of the CEFR rather than being systematically linked to it. So what we did was we took the course that we had and we identified how the CEFR was related to it in a systematic way, and we developed the assessment tool based on that experience. So if you, much of the time, a course book is in an academy or in an English language teaching context, a course book is chosen. It doesn't really have any other curriculum apart from the contents page. And then teachers are asked to, or managers are asked to invent their own assessment system, which is almost exclusively informed by the principles of large-scale summative tests. And none of these things fit together. So you have to decide, what am I trying to get? What am I trying to do in my course? Do I want a course that focuses predominantly on the productive skills? Do I want to include some element of reading or listening skills development? And once you've made those decisions, you need to see whether the materials are actually teaching those, because it may be that when you try and systematically align the course to the CEFR through an analysis of all the activities, it might be that the course just doesn't teach reading or listening. Therefore, you'd have to adapt the course materials. So the process of systematically mapping and making the construct of the course clearer then makes it easier to understand how you might assess in that course in a fair way. So it's very much asking the question, what do I want to achieve by this course? And then look at the materials you're using, systematically link them to the CEFR, potentially following the guidance in the publication that I mentioned in the workshop, and then choose the assessment system that best fits that. Sounds complicated, but yeah, it's very much try to make your curriculum explicit, which it very rarely, from my experience in different contexts, is made explicit enough.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Aidan. I can see that there's another hand up, but actually we've kind of run out for questions now, but I will supply an email address and we're always happy to take some more questions when we'll make sure to forward them to Aidan.
Yeah. Also, Elena, happy to share the slide, happy to share the presentation. If you want to pass that on to people, that's fine.
That's fantastic.
I can't share the spoken sample, but you can share the presentation.
That's fine, thank you. Well, so thank you so much, Aidan, for sharing all this practical knowledge, and thank you so much all for participating. Just a couple of last words from me. As I've already mentioned, these webinars are part of a series of events and lead up to the New Directions Conference, which is taking place on the 27th to the 29th of October in Hanoi this year. And we, of course, hope to see so many of you there attending or presenting. This year's theme is the future of English language assessment in learning systems, and we're currently still accepting proposals until the 2nd of July. If you would like to find out more, please scan the QR code here, and we are looking forward to receiving your proposals. On this slide here as well, you can see New Directions East Asia at britishchancellor.org is an email address you can reach us on if you have any questions relating to the upcoming conference, the proposals, or today's webinar. And we have 2 more upcoming webinars over the next few months. In July, we are being joined by Meena Patel, co-author of The Future of English Global Perspectives publication, to discuss findings from the project and to illuminate the role of English teachers in a world that has seen some dramatic changes and disruptions in the recent years. And then in September, we are joined by our colleague Rados Valkova, who will conduct a webinar looking at challenges and connect it into engaging stakeholders and understanding how technology implementation can be used as an effective tool in the assessment of young learners. Again, here the QR code to register. And then we've had a couple of questions. This webinar was recorded and we will share this through our YouTube channels so you can look at it again. Apologies again for any of the issues that we had with the slide sharing. Please do share your feedback with us. Please scan the QR code. You'll also be able to register your email address if you'd like to receive a certificate for participating in today's webinar. So that's the final words from me. Thank you so very much, Aidan, again for joining us today, and thank you to everyone else and have a very good rest of your day.